Some things only come once in a lifetime. And when they do, you have two choices: ignore them and remain unchanged, or receive them and watch your entire reality begin to shift. This moment, right now, is not random. You didn't stumble across this video by mistake. You were guided here. Not by algorithm, not by coincidence, but by a field of intelligence that sees through surface-level actions. And the message that's about to be revealed to you is not just information. It's not a theory, a concept, or a philosophy. It is a vibrational code. This code has been hidden for thousands of years. Not because it was meant to be exclusive, but because it's only visible to those who are ready. And if you're watching this, it means something in your energetic field has already begun to shift. Have you felt it lately? The subtle changes in your life? The strange signs? The feeling that something isn't quite the same anymore? That's not your imagination. It's resonance. And this frequency, once it begins to touch you, doesn't stop. It activates something ancient inside you, something your mind cannot explain. This is not about knowledge. It's not something you can study, memorize, or analyze. It's not an idea you adopt. It's a frequency you remember. And the moment it begins to awaken in you, there is no going back. Ancient beings, those who shaped the earliest civilizations, knew this code. They didn't write books. They didn't start religions. They encoded frequency into symbols, into stories, into the movement of energy through breath, sound, and geometry. And this frequency? It's showing itself to you now. But not because someone chose you. Because you have finally reached the point where you can choose it. This teaching was protected across centuries by those labeled mystics, heretics, occultists. The Sufis danced it. The Kabbalists diagrammed it. The Rosicrucians sealed it in the rose at the center of the cross. Not because they wanted power, but because they knew what happens when the unprepared touch sacred frequency. It becomes distorted. It becomes dangerous. And so it was hidden, not buried, but sealed. Protected not in vaults, but in vibration. It wasn't kept from you. You were simply waiting for the moment when your vibration would rise enough to see it. If you're still listening, that moment has arrived. You don't need to understand it. Your mind will try. It will demand logic, structure, proof. But this is not about convincing the intellect. This is about remembering through vibration. And remembrance doesn't happen through thinking. It happens through resonance. It's like hearing a melody you've never heard, but somehow knowing every note. Like meeting someone for the first time and feeling like you've known them for lifetimes. That feeling is the first sign. The vibration is already here. And here's what's important. This isn't just about manifesting desires. It's not about getting what you want. It's about discovering who you really are underneath all the noise, beneath the programming, the doubts, the ego masks. That's why this message is not for everyone. Because once you know, you can't unknow. Once the veil is lifted, it cannot be lowered again. And if something inside you is saying yes right now, without understanding why, then your inner code has already begun to activate. Stay until the end. Not because we want your views, but because your field is entering alignment. And when that happens, the transformation is not theoretical. It's energetic. It's irreversible. If you feel it, if this feels like more than just a video, then this is your moment. Click like, not for us, but as a silent gesture to the universe that says, I heard the call. Subscribe, not for updates, but to anchor this new vibration into your field. This is how you say without speaking, I am ready. I am part of this awakening. I walk with those who remember. You are not here by accident. And everything begins now. Quiet kind of sadness that settles in once you begin to remember who you truly are. It doesn't come from failure. It doesn't come from loss. It comes from the realization of how deeply you've been asleep. For so long, you lived by rules that weren't yours. You followed beliefs that didn't belong to your soul. You tried to fit into a system designed to keep you disconnected from your own power, and you didn't even know it was happening. You went to school. You learned the right answers. You were told to chase success, approval, perfection. You obeyed the formulas of manifestation. Speak positively. Visualize clearly, boldly. But something still didn't click. Deep inside you felt the gap. Like something sacred had been forgotten. You began to see that what you were taught wasn't wrong, it was incomplete. And that incompleteness bred confusion, pain, and disillusionment. That's when the sadness hits. It's the grief of recognizing how long you've been at war with yourself. How often you doubted your intuition. How many times you betrayed your own energy just to be accepted. You start to notice the residue of old programming. The inherited traumas. The unconscious beliefs. And it all feels heavy, because it is. But what hurts even more is knowing that much of what you've struggled with was never truly yours. It was passed down. Conditioned. Absorbed. And under that sadness is anger. Not the destructive kind, but a sacred fire. The fire of awakening. The anger that says, enough. You look around at a world built on control, fear, and scarcity, and something inside you starts to burn. Not in hatred, but in clarity. You begin to question everything. Why do two people live the same situation and experience entirely different outcomes? Why do you feel resistance when you speak your truth? Why does the system reward obedience but punish authenticity? The answer is frequency. You were never taught how to feel it. You were taught to chase things, fix things, prove things. But no one taught you how to align with your being. You were never shown how your field, the invisible energy around and within you, is the true architect of your life. Your results aren't a product of your intentions alone. They're the byproduct of your vibration. And the problem is, most people are vibrating unconsciously, running on scripts that weren't written by their soul. This is where everything begins to change. The moment you understand that your life is not reacting to your words, but to your essence. You can say all the right things, but if your inner state is anchored in fear, lack, or shame, your field will broadcast that. The universe listens to your vibration, not your vocabulary. And that is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying, because it means no one is coming to save you. That all the struggles, the blocks, the cycles you repeat, they've been orchestrated from your own frequency. But also liberating, because it means you can change everything. Not through force. Not through effort. But through internal alignment. You begin to reclaim your sovereignty, not in theory but in practice. You stop blaming the world. You stop seeking validation. You stop waiting for the right moment. Instead, you turn inward and begin to reprogram your own field. You begin to feel the subtle vibrations, when your words match your being, when your actions align with your soul, when your presence becomes your power. And yes, there will still be grief. Because awakening doesn't erase the past. It reveals it. You'll cry for the parts of you that were silenced. You'll mourn the years you lost chasing illusions. You'll feel the weight of everything you once believed. But that grief is sacred. It's the washing away of illusion. The cleansing of confusion. The clearing of space for something true to emerge. This sadness is not weakness. It is the birth of your clarity. The start of your remembrance. The doorway into your real identity. Let yourself feel it. Because in the center of that sadness, and just beyond the edge of that anger, a new frequency is waiting. And it's not coming from outside of you. It's rising from within. When all the heaviness begins to lift. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, like light seeping through the cracks of a long-sealed door. For the first time in what feels like ages, you feel it again, joy. But this joy isn't the surface-level excitement sold in packages or the conditional high tied to outcomes. This joy is ancient. It is rooted in memory, not of your mind, but of your soul. It's the joy of remembering something real. The realization comes like a whisper. I was never truly lost. I was only asleep. And with that thought, something deep within you begins to stir. You remember the feeling of being aligned, of simply being present, without fear or comparison. You remember what it's like to feel alive without needing a reason. This isn't a fantasy. It's your natural state, the one you were born into before the world taught you otherwise. And suddenly, what once felt confusing now feels full of possibility. Your mind, once filled with doubts and demands, starts to quiet. You begin to notice the beauty in small things, the rhythm of your breath, the sound of wind, the way light dances on water. You feel a presence in your chest, a gentle expanding warmth, not caused by anything, but existing as its own source. That presence is you. The real you. The one not fragmented by roles or expectations. The one who doesn't need to chase truth because it already is truth. This is the beginning of vibrational memory returning. You may find yourself smiling for no reason, laughing at the absurdity of things you once took so seriously, crying not from pain, but from the release of old tension. These are all signs. Signs that the field is shifting. Signs that joy, real joy, is returning, not as an escape, but as alignment. The kind of joy that doesn't demand effort. It arises naturally when the false begins to fall away. And make no mistake, this feeling isn't fragile. It's resilient. It doesn't fade in discomfort, it expands. Because joy is not the absence of difficulty. It's the presence of alignment. You can feel pain and still be joyful. You can face uncertainty and still know peace. Because the joy now flowing through you is not based on what happens outside. It's sourced from within. And that shift changes everything. The ancient mystics knew this. They danced not to impress the divine, but to align with it. They chanted not to summon something external, but to activate something internal. They moved with joy, because they remembered what we are all just beginning to remember, that the universe vibrates with delight. That creation itself is joy made visible. And when you match that vibration even briefly, you become part of the rhythm of life itself. You're not here to suffer your way into awakening. You're not here to punish yourself for the past. You're here to remember. And when that remembrance touches you, the joy that comes isn't optional, it's inevitable. It may start small, a shift in tone, a change in breath, a tingling in your hands, but it grows. And as it grows, so does your clarity. You begin to see through the veil. You recognize synchronicities not as coincidences, but as affirmations. You start to feel guided, not in every detail, but in direction. Life becomes less of a problem to solve and more of a mystery to move with. And so you smile. Because in that smile, everything changes. You realize that this journey was never about becoming someone new. It was always about removing the layers that never belonged to you. Underneath it all, you were always enough. You were always in tune. You were always part of the great rhythm. This joy you feel now isn't a reward. It's a remembering. And once it begins, it doesn't go away. It becomes the foundation for everything else that will follow. You are beginning to vibrate with life again. You are coming home. There comes a shift, a sudden, undeniable pulse in the field. When you no longer just feel joy, you become it. The energy running through you is no longer passive. It's active, alive. You walk into a room and the space feels different. Not because you're trying to change it, but because your vibration already has. And that's when you begin to understand the deeper laws of energy. Not intellectually, but experientially. You realize you're not just someone having an awakening. You are the awakening. This is what the ancient initiates prepared for. This is what Thoth encoded into symbols, what sages hid in rituals and myths, not to mystify, but to protect the power from those who weren't ready. Because this kind of power isn't something you hold. It's something you become. It doesn't move from the outside in. It radiates from the inside out. At this stage, energy becomes your language. You start to sense things before they happen. You feel people's fields before they speak. You notice the unspoken vibrations in spaces, and your own state becomes your primary compass. What feels off is no longer ignored. What feels aligned becomes the only path. It's not logic. It's frequency. And it's undeniable. This is the frequency of authentic power. Not the loud, forceful kind. Not dominance or control. This power doesn't need to convince anyone. It simply is. And when you embody it, everything starts responding. Life becomes interactive, not theoretical. You speak less, but your words carry more. You act less, but your presence does more. You no longer seek outcomes because you understand, you are the source of outcomes. At this point, manifestation shifts completely. You stop visualizing from lack. You stop affirming from desperation. You stop asking as if you're begging the universe. That entire paradigm collapses. You now operate from a knowing that what you're aligned with must come. It's not arrogance. It's resonance. You are simply in sync with the flow that already exists, and because of that, reality adjusts. You're not working hard to attract. You're not hacking the universe. You're vibrating as one who has already arrived. And in that shift, something truly miraculous happens. Effort dissolves. The push disappears. Life begins to work with you, not because it's rewarding you, but because it recognizes you. You've become a coherent field. A vibrational match for clarity, abundance, truth. This energy is magnetic, not because it pulls, but because it radiates. And radiance is irresistible. It's not about becoming the brightest in the room. It's about becoming the most authentic. That's the light people feel but can't explain. That's what draws aligned opportunities, people, resources. You're not forcing doors to open. They open because your frequency carries the key. And that's why this stage of the journey feels so electrifying. You feel alive. Not just happy, but purposeful. You're not driven by the past anymore. You're pulled forward by resonance. Every cell in your body starts to align with that pulse. You sleep lighter. You speak more clearly. You move with intention. There's no longer a division between your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. They begin to move as one current, pure coherence. This is the beginning of mastery. And mastery isn't perfection. It's presence. It's knowing who you are without needing proof. It's walking into uncertainty with a stable field. It's no longer fearing the unknown, because your vibration creates the known from the unknown. You are becoming a lighthouse in a world of confusion. You no longer chase purpose. You embody it. You no longer seek energy. You emit it. You no longer ask, "What should I do?" but instead feel, "What wants to flow through me now?" The shift is real. The power is active. And it's just the beginning. Certain level of coherence, life starts to reflect you. Not your ego, not your fears, not your stories, but your true vibration. You no longer see a chaotic world responding to your efforts. You begin to see a world mirroring your essence. And in that recognition, you feel a new kind of joy, one that carries pride, not from achievement, but from alignment. You've stopped chasing. You've stopped begging the universe to bring you things. You've stopped trying to manifest from the outside in. Instead, you've begun to embody your frequency so completely that life has to reorganize around you. The laws of the universe are not impressed by how hard you work. They respond only to what you are. And what you are now, what you're choosing to maintain in silence, in solitude, when no one is watching, that is what reality is calibrating to. And here's the deeper truth. You are not manifesting. You are being mirrored. Reality doesn't respond to the surface. It responds to the source. And that source is always within you. You may offer kindness, take action, create with intention, but the shift only happens when the why behind it aligns with truth. The universe doesn't listen to appearance. It listens to vibration. A gesture done to impress carries a different field than one done from fullness. Even a simple smile, if rooted in love, has more power than 1,000 declarations of light performed for validation. That's why life seems to start flowing now. Not because things are finally working, but because you've stopped working against yourself. You've stopped contradicting your own frequency. You've dropped the masks, the effort to control, the subtle resistance. And from that surrender, a new identity emerges, not built on doing, but on being. It's a quiet strength. You notice it in your presence, in how people respond without knowing why, in how spaces feel calmer when you walk in how conversations shift tone when you speak with coherence. This is not magic. This is resonance. Your energy is no longer noisy. It's clear, focused, and clarity is magnetic. You may begin to notice the world rearranging itself in strange ways. Unexpected invitations. Unexplainable coincidences. People saying exactly what you were just thinking. Doors opening without you asking. This isn't chance, it's the language of coherence. It's the mirror principle in action. When you reflect truth, the world reflects truth back to you. But this mirror also shows you what's unresolved. And that's where a quiet sadness may emerge. You may still see fragments. Traces of old patterns. People showing up as tests. Emotions surfacing unexpectedly. It's not regression. It's reflection. The universe is not punishing you. It's giving you one last look at the energies you're still broadcasting unconsciously. And every time you meet those reflections with awareness instead of reaction, the frequency tightens, refines, sharpens. You are being sculpted by your own vibration. This is why the journey requires both pride and humility. Pride in knowing you've come this far. Humility in facing what still needs integration. And in that space between pride and humility, something sacred forms. Integrity. Integrity is not about being perfect. It's about being whole. And when you start operating from integrity, life moves. Not in chaotic bursts, but in waves of precision. What's meant to go, goes. What's meant to arrive, arrives. Without struggle. Without force. Your timeline begins to organize itself around your coherence. You become the center of your field, not by control, but by truth. This is where manifestation becomes inevitable. Not because you've mastered a technique, but because you've mastered your presence. You've become the mirror. And the mirror doesn't attract. It reflects. And what you reflect is truth. There's a moment on the journey that changes everything, not gradually, but all at once. It doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself. But when it arrives, you feel it deep in your core. It's the moment of reversal. The instant you stop being a passive receiver of life and become an active generator of it. Until now, everything has been flowing toward you. Experiences, emotions, stories, challenges, lessons. But in this sacred reversal, everything begins to flow from you. You become the pulse. You become the source. And that changes the entire structure of your reality. You realize that the universe never cared what you said. It responded to what you meant. It listened not to your words, but to your frequency. And now, your frequency no longer imitates what's around you. It leads it. You no longer match your environment. You shift it. Not through control, but through coherence. This is when your presence becomes energetic architecture. Everything around you starts to organize itself according to what you're broadcasting silently. And that's why this reversal feels powerful, but also vulnerable. Because now there's no hiding. You can't fake your field. The frequency you hold in secret is the one life responds to. Not your ambition. Not your vision board. Not your performance. But your core resonance. What you embody when no one is watching. That's the thrill and the fear. Because most people were never taught how to generate reality. They were taught how to request it. They were told to ask, visualize, affirm, repeat. But they were never told the real key. The universe doesn't respond to repetition, it responds to reverberation, to the emotional echo of your being. And that echo, that signal, doesn't come from thought. It comes from your relationship with every moment. So now, even receiving becomes an offering. You receive with such awareness, such presence, such gratitude, that your very act of receiving sends a message back into the field. I am ready. I am aligned. I am here not just to take, but to amplify. This is the frequency that creates flow. It's not about rejecting desires. It's about integrating them, allowing them to pass through you, not as cravings, but as catalysts. You become like a tuning fork for the divine. A vessel that vibrates with the original rhythm of life. You don't need to convince the universe anymore. You've become the code it recognizes. And that's why life begins to respond faster. Not because you're better. Not because you've unlocked a cheat code. But because you've stopped scrambling your signal. Your energy no longer sends mixed messages. You're no longer asking for freedom while vibrating in fear. You're no longer seeking abundance while carrying scarcity. You're no longer pretending peace while holding resentment. You're clean. Not morally, but vibrationally. And that clarity makes you magnetic. Not in a way that pulls, but in a way that emanates. You're not trying to attract anymore. You're radiating. And when you radiate, what's aligned finds you, not because you chased it, but because you became the frequency it was seeking. But this reversal has a cost. It requires you to let go of victimhood. It demands that you release the idea that life is happening to you. And that's terrifying. Because for many, victimhood has been a kind of safety, a shield against the unknown, a way to explain pain, a place to hide from responsibility. But in the reversal, that shield dissolves. You can't blame circumstances. You can't outsource power. Because now you know, you are the circumstance. You are the field. And that realization is both exhilarating and overwhelming. But it's also the doorway to true freedom. Because once you understand this, you stop trying to control outcomes. You start listening to the field. You stop forcing. You start flowing. And in that flow, the most surprising thing happens. Life becomes precise. Not perfect. Not painless. But precise. What no longer fits begins to leave. What belongs begins to arrive. And all of it unfolds with an intelligence that words can't explain. Because you are no longer just receiving reality. You are becoming it. There is a law older than all others. It cannot be taught, only remembered. And once it is remembered, it begins to dissolve everything that separates you from others, from yourself, from the source. This law is simple in words, but infinite in depth. Love your neighbor as yourself. Not as an ideal, not as a virtue, but as a vibration. And that changes everything. Because what if your neighbor is not just the person next to you, but every reflection you meet? What if the other you struggle to understand, the person who triggers you, who challenges you, who makes you uncomfortable, what if that person is not separate from you at all? What if they are showing you what you have not yet seen within yourself? This is the mirror of love. And it is the most difficult mirror to face. Because when you begin to awaken, you naturally begin to feel joy, to feel power, to feel energy flowing again. But then something unexpected appears, resistance, judgment, frustration, not from the world, but from within. You realize that love is not just about comfort, it's about reflection. And that love, real love, starts to expose the parts of you that still carry pain, shame, resentment, fear. This is not a flaw in your process. This is the process. Because until now, your love has been conditional, reserved for those who agree, who understand, who align. But now, the real work begins, loving the unlovable, seeing the sacred in what appears broken, feeling oneness even where separation once stood. This is not about becoming a doormat. It's not about being endlessly nice or agreeable. That's performance. This is about recognizing vibration. Recognizing that even the darkest expression of another human being is a frequency of consciousness that has simply forgotten its origin. It is not your job to fix it. It is not your job to absorb it. It is your task to see it without dividing yourself from it. And this requires immense strength. Because most people want awakening without discomfort. They want ascension without confrontation. They want to rise without first descending into what they've buried. But light that refuses to face the dark is not light, it's denial. And love that avoids the shadow is not love, it's fear. This is why your relationships start to shift. You begin to notice how much of your past behavior was rooted in avoidance. How much of your spirituality was actually an attempt to bypass pain. But now you can no longer run. Because the truth has landed, there is no other. There is only reflection. And when you can sit in front of another, especially the one who disturbs you most, and say silently, "You are me in another form," something breaks. Not in you, but in the illusion. The mask falls. The separation dissolves. And in that moment, something sacred occurs. Integration. You become whole not by perfection, but by inclusion. By welcoming even the parts of yourself you once exiled. By forgiving what you once judged. By choosing to see all of it, as part of the divine. This is love beyond concept. Love beyond emotion. Love as vibration. And this love is not soft. It is not always comfortable. It demands everything from you. It stretches you beyond what your ego wants. It asks you to walk into fire without armor, to listen when you want to speak, to forgive when it would feel better to fight, to include when everything inside you wants to exclude. But when you do, you don't just change your energy. You change the field. You become the eye of the storm, the stillness in chaos, the frequency that others feel but cannot define. And your presence alone becomes healing, not because you tried, but because you remembered, because you became the mirror. This is the path of the awakened heart, not sentimental, not idealistic, unbreakable. It's been opened through love, when the mind has surrendered to presence, when judgment dissolves into reflection, something ancient begins to stir. It's not external. It's not visible at first. It's subtle, internal, but undeniable. A sensation of light moving through you. Not symbolic light, vibrational light. Energy that is no longer scattered, but unified. This is the beginning of the light body. And it's not fantasy. It's not mythology. It's not becoming some glowing being that floats above the world. It's much deeper and much more real. The activation of the light body happens when every layer of your being begins to align. When your thoughts, emotions, choices, and presence all start moving as one coherent signal. It's the moment when you stop leaking energy in 1,000 directions and start emanating from your center. That's why life starts responding instantly. Why people start feeling you before you speak. Why time begins to stretch or compress. Why clarity replaces confusion. You're no longer trying to influence reality. You've become a living extension of it. And this isn't about effort. It's about frequency. You are now operating from the level of resonance. And when you reach this level, manifestation becomes automatic. Not because you're doing it right, but because you're not doing anything wrong. You've stopped resisting. You've stopped contradicting. You've stopped doubting your own signal. And in that alignment, the current of life flows without obstruction. This is living alchemy. Not transforming metals, but transforming states. Transmuting fear into awareness. Resistance into flow. Pain into wisdom. You don't become someone else. You become more of who you truly are. Your nervous system stabilizes. Your reactions soften. Your voice becomes clear, unforced, yet deeply felt. You speak less but say more. You don't preach, you vibrate. And the world feels it. Your very presence becomes a permission slip for others to remember who they are. Not because you have the answers, but because your being has become the answer. But this frequency comes with responsibility, not the weight of performance, but the weightlessness of integrity. Because now your energy affects the field. Your coherence organizes the space. Your silence becomes more instructive than words. This is the point where you no longer try to become spiritual. You realize you already are, and always were. And from that realization, something beautiful unfolds. You stop needing to prove anything. You're not on a path anymore. You've become the path. You're not trying to find the light. You are carrying it. Not as a badge. Not as an identity. But as a vibration. And the universe recognizes it. Not by blessing you with things, but by aligning the flow around you with precision. Synchronicities multiply. People appear right on time. Confusion becomes guidance. You stop asking, will this work out? And start feeling, of course it will. Because now, life no longer sees you as separate. It sees you as an active participant in its intelligence. You have become an extension of the source. This is the real secret, not manifestation through desire, but manifestation through identity. You no longer say, I want. You now realize, I am. And from that center, you don't beg the universe. You vibrate in harmony with it. That's when resistance dies. That's when waiting ends. That's when you become the very thing others are seeking, not through teaching, but through being. You are the light. You are the mirror. You are the frequency the world is tuning into, not because you demanded it, but because you finally matched it. So now, what comes, comes. What goes, goes. What stays, stays. Not because you control it, but because you are in total coherence. And that is the most powerful force in the universe. The soundless vibration of a soul that has remembered itself.